Hey everybody, welcome back to Power Attack. My name's Seth, and today I'm going to be doing something kind of a little bit different. We're going to be talking about Anthem, and we're going to be talking about the beta for Anthem in particular. Now, for those of you that have been living under a rock or haven't paid any attention to like any recent news from EA, which is obviously a major AAA publisher, Anthem is EA's response to Destiny. It's developed by BioWare. It's going to be a $60 title, or you can get into it with EA Access, or there's an $80 like collector's edition version. And I wanted to spend some time talking about the background for Anthem and who made it, like who's making it, BioWare, and what I think that'll mean. And then I want to talk about the gameplay some, because there is a recent beta that's been happening. So, for starters, BioWare is a pretty good studio. They've got good back history. They did the Dragon Age games and the Mass Effect games, and they're well known for making good RPGs. But this isn't really an RPG. It's, at least as far as I can tell. There are RPG elements, but it's first and foremost an MMO, like, looter shooter. And so we've got kind of an interesting situation happening where maybe it ends up being good, but I don't know of any serious background that BioWare has with this particular brand of shooter. But, you know, we'll see. Maybe it ends up being good. So Anthem overall, however, is a fast action kind of looter shooter that focuses on high mobility and some spongier enemies. A lot of these little guys that I'm killing here are just basic grunts, and they're still taking me like a handful of shots, or I guess stabs. And I frequently have to ult for the big guys. So it focuses on high mobility and kind of low impact. And that's not necessarily a good thing, because the guns don't, in my opinion, feel great. They don't feel bad. They just don't feel great. One of the things I always really liked about a lot of first-person shooters like Rainbow Six or you know, even Destiny to some degree, is that the guns always felt powerful. When I fire a gun in Destiny and it hits an enemy, it doesn't matter that his health didn't go down much. It makes me feel like I fired a powerful weapon at a powerful enemy. And that's not as present here, and that's kind of why I gravitated towards this class, and we'll talk about classes in a little bit. With that said, the gunplay isn't, you know, dissatisfying, and I think that some of the heavy weapons might actually be really good and strong. But the basic assault rifles and pistols and stuff just really aren't doing it for me. The movement. So, running around and jumping and double jumping, and this class that I've got right now is got a triple jump. It feels awesome. They really nailed like jumping and leaping around combat and making it feel like you're navigating through a war zone. Sometimes at the expense of being able to tell what's happening, but it feels great. The flying and swimming, on the other hand, are genuinely some of the worst I've ever played. The flying and swimming were clearly developed for controller and stick controls, and when you're playing on keyboard and mouse, it does not mesh well, and it just doesn't it doesn't feel good. You can see here what I'm kind of talking about with the UI, where there's a center circle and an external circle, and the external circle is where my mouse is moving, but the center circle tries to realign with where I am. That's fine, but this delay on movement means that you can never adequately control how fast you're turning, and you end up feeling like you've got to really punch it to the left or right to get like a sharp angle, and it just doesn't feel good. And the swimming is the same way, which is even worse because it's very easy to lose up and lose which direction you need to be heading while underwater. It's just not good. And honestly, one of my biggest caveats with the game, and one of the things that I'll tell people if they're interested in this game to maybe wait on, is for them to fix these flying and swimming controls, because they just don't feel good. And the worst part is they're visually spectacular, right? Flying and doing a nosedive to then arc back upward and then drop into a melee attack it feels awesome. It feels stellar. Then there's this, which is when you go down, you're kind of just, at least right now, and the beta the full game may be different from this demo, but right now, when you get stuck, when you get down, as far as I'm aware, you are just waiting for someone to revive you. And it says that I'm respawning, but I never was able to respawn until someone came and picked me up, which this guy over here is getting ready to come do, thankfully. So there's some core gameplay caveats here that don't really handle super well. But what about the javelins, right? Like, you know, if some of the core gameplay is kind of iffy, does that mean that the javelins all feel kind of shit too? And thankfully, no. You've got 4 javelin classes for the beta, or the demo. I think that they're the only 4 that'll be around on release, but they have hinted that there will be more added at a later date. And they've also said that there will be no paid DLC that isn't cosmetic. So there's not going to be, we're not going to run into a Destiny 2 Forsaken situation where you're paying another $40 for the game that it should have been on launch. Though you might have to pay for, you know, pretty colors or decals or something. I think that the classes mostly feel pretty good. I've only played 2 of them. I've played the Ranger and the Interceptor, and we'll talk about what each of those are in a minute. But from what I've seen of the other 2, which would be the Colossus and the Storm, I think that they'll be good fun. So, the classes, right? The Javelins. The Ranger is kind of... I've heard him described as a combat bard, which is to say, I've heard him described as a Javelin class that can be used for anything, but excels at nothing, and I think that's accurate. The Javelin seems to be just kind of there. It's obviously it's who you start with, because the game is, for, you know, I think obvious reasons, going to say, hey, we're not going to start you in a specialized mech, because then you'll have a hard time, you know, adjusting to any of the other mechs. That's fine. But it does mean that your starting class is kind of boring. And in the beta, in the demo, you're starting at level 10 and you don't get another Javelin until level 12. And that was like a couple hours, like an hour or 2 for me, although I also kind of meandered around. I'm hoping that you don't have to wait till level 12 and start at level 1 once the full game is released, because that would kind of suck. The Javelin's kind of boring, but he's got decent health and decent armor. And his movement is average. He is average across the board. He is the most milquetoast Javelin in the game. Now for the one that I'm playing here, though, is the Interceptor. And God, I love this Javelin. This thing's so fun to run around in. I can't express how entertaining it is to sprint around and triple jump through enemies and then just land on them and start throwing knives at them. It's super high mobility, it's super squishy, and unlike the Ranger, the Interceptor doesn't have a cooldown on its melee ability, which I think is pretty interesting. And I'm assuming that the other ones also have cooldowns on their melee abilities, because none of them are as melee focused as the Javelin, or as the Interceptor. Overall, though, like... Oh, little stutter there. Overall, I think that this will probably be the Javelin for me. I think that this thing is fun and impressive, and this is probably the most direct one that I think that the comparison to Warframe could be made, even though everyone is enjoying calling this thing Warframe by EA. They're wrong, and we'll talk about that in a bit. Up next would be, and I don't think there's any one of these in the party, the Colossus. The Colossus is big and tanky and really low mobility, and he isn't really more than like a surface level character as far as I can tell. He's either a tank or high DPS. He's the only class that can use heavy weapons, but he can't use pistols or submachine guns. And it seems likely to me that he might have larger hitbox, because he's like double the size of any of these Javelins. All these guys are kind of loosely the same size. You can see a Storm there for a moment. But the Colossus is fucking huge. He's the tank bruiser class. So you know, if the Ranger is your I guess Ranger, right? It's kind of an all-around combat. It can kind of do a little bit of anything. Then the Interceptor is your rogue, and the Colossus is your like maybe paladin or fighter. I hesitate to call him like a paladin because that implies that he can heal, and he can't. There's no healing classes yet. And then last is your Storm, which is, you know, your mage. And the Storm is kind of a lot like the Interceptor in that it's real squishy. It's a little less mobile, but it can fly, like, permanently, as far as I'm aware. Like, it doesn't have this, overheat bar from levitating. It's pretty high DPS. It seems to be maybe a, battlefield control class. I've had the Storm freeze a lot of enemies for me before. And I think that it'll be probably best served as a mix between like a support and a DPS class. That's, you know, I mean, we've got our traditional RPG archetypes here, and I don't think that's a bad thing. In fact, I think that's probably a good thing. It makes this a little more grounded for people that, I mean, look at that movement. It makes this a little more grounded for people that don't play a lot of MMOs, but are familiar with, like, everyone, you know, everyone in the Western world is pretty much familiar with traditional RPG archetypes. Yeah, I mean... And obviously the Storm will have a ranged combat focus. It's not going to be something that is going to be getting up in people's faces like the Interceptor or maybe the Colossus. I think that there's a lot of room here for anyone to have a playstyle that they like, and I think that's a very good thing, but it's not got particularly unique classes. Like, none of these classes are something that I'm like, I've never seen that before, and in some ways that's good, and in some ways that's bad. Familiarity is something that shouldn't be dismissed, but I'd have loved to see, like, a weird class in here. Now, I said before that they're probably going to add some other classes. They've indicated to some degree that they will. And I think that I'd love to see a healer class. I think a healer class is almost necessary. You could fluff it as, like, nanobots repairing other people's javelins mid-combat. It would give another role that fits into this kind of traditional MMO focus that like they kind of seem to have. Although obviously these are like structured missions, at least for the beta. But you can free roam and shit, so I don't know. We'll see. I'd also love to maybe see like, we kind of have the Interceptor for this already, but I'd love to see maybe a monk-ish class, something that's more focused on hand-to-hand combat. As well as like a sniper class, something that's focused more on ranged combat, because we have the long range and the short range, but we don't have the like extremes of those, right? The Storm is kind of long range, but I'd love to see the extreme long range that's just a big Gauss rifle. And yeah, maybe something like that would be nice to add later on. Maybe they're I really do worry that 4 classes at the start isn't going to be enough. But with that said, the classes can switch really easily. You have kind of, it does follow standard MMO behavior of a character level and a class level, or I guess a character level and a javelin level, which is to say you've got equipment that you equip to each javelin, and that increases the javelin's level, kind of. With some of these things being cross compatible, right? Like I can move my weapons across pretty easily. And that's good. And it does mean that maybe there's a little more longevity here, in that if I get bored with a Colossus, I can switch to an Interceptor, or vice versa. There's also some kind of crafting system, right? I've found items and seen the crafting menu, but I wasn't able to craft anything that was worthwhile. And nothing even on the menu looked like it would be worthwhile. It was all commons that you could craft. So I don't know, we'll see. There's some benefit to free roaming as a result of that crafting system existing, but I'm not convinced by it yet. We'll see that. Maybe something interesting comes out of it. I mean, it's definitely a looter shooter, and we've got a lot to do in that. If you enjoy running around the world, like there's a lot here. There's a lot of interesting world building just happening ambiently in the background in the form of like crashed out ships, and there's these alien races that I've got no idea about. I don't even know what this setting is, honestly. I don't think it's Earth. It doesn't look like it's Earth. And so, you know, maybe there's a good story here too, but it's hard to say. There's a Colossus, that's what they look like, and you can see they're fucking massive. So I don't know, there's one downside to the gameplay that I found, which is that I never felt like I was in trouble even when my health is low, because I can always jump out and fly away. And so there's never much tension in the fight. And so, like, it makes you feel very powerful, and that's good, but it never makes you get the high of beating a hard fight that you weren't sure you were gonna beat. And I kind of personally always really enjoyed that in games, and I think that most people do. I guess it's to say that there's a lot happening here, and some of it adds tension in that, like, some of these classes do have very little health, but it's never enough to make me sweat, and that's kind of what you want in a game like this, is you want to have those moments where perfect rotations are necessary and someone's got to, like, switch aggro at just the right time, or else the run falls apart, because that adds stakes to the fight, and without those stakes, like, what are you gonna do? There's not a whole lot happening otherwise. You're just gonna shoot the same mindless enemies and get bored because you didn't risk anything to do it. But we'll see. Maybe it's... This is obviously low-level gameplay, so it's probably reasonable to assume that things will get a lot more, how to put it, a lot more busy at the later levels, I guess. But, you know, all that independent, right, there's a really important question here that I don't think we've ever managed to address, and that's, is it fun? Is Anthem a fun game? And, you know, I think so. I don't know if it'll fill the same gap for me that games like Destiny filled, when I wanted to, when I wanted desperately to like an MMO but couldn't like MMOs. Destiny kind of took a spot that was... Destiny kind of filled a spot that I never thought would fill for me, because MMOs have always been these point and click on enemy, like point and click the same 4 buttons in the same order every time. Hey, thanks Facebook. It's always been the same 4, you know, buttons in the same order, and that's never been entertaining to me. You know, watch the cooldown. Oh, the cooldown's finished. Let me hit 4 again. Watch the cooldown. And that's just never been something that entertained me. But Destiny had the active shooting element to it that really gave me something to do while waiting for cooldowns, and that's something that I always kind of needed without ever really realizing. And I think that maybe this can do it, but they need to do some work to make some of these weapons feel a little better, or I need to just try the other weapons and find the weapons that suit me. Maybe I need grenades. Or, I don't know, maybe...
Wow.
Yeah, maybe I need grenade launchers or something. Who knows? It's kind of hard to say. But it is fun, I think. I've been enjoying myself with it. Is it $60 fun? I'll be the judge of that. I've already bought in. Is that a mistake? Probably. But it'll be fine, I'm sure.
That's a lot of eggs. You know what they say? You've got to crack a few eggs to make an omelette.
I don't want that omelette.
The banter's pretty good.
What is that?
And there's an interesting story just from like the 2 missions that you can play in the demo.
I hate it when they do that.
What do we do now?
Gather the fragments and silence the relic.
We'll see. Well, I guess I'll just let this play out from here. And yeah, you'll probably see a video when it finishes, when it hits release. All right.
Heads up, scars incoming.
How'd they get down here?
Bastards love to borrow. Freelancer.
More scars, I know.
He's looking extra powerful.
Almost done. Only a few fragments left.